Well, it's good to be here, and every time I come to a conference like this, I always think it's quite wonderful, but talk is cheap, and how do we turn that into action? Often it's not by sitting in front of our computers and thinking big thoughts. It requires going out and doing the science, and understanding how nature, how materials work, and then using that to do something useful. If we can get the technology working. Here we go. So why are we doing technology? What's it all for is the biggest question. And it's not for changing slides. Can we do it manually? I can give you a wave or something. There we go. Right, my background. Click. I've been variously a musician, an engineer. I'm currently chief executive of a company on the London Stock Exchange. But throughout my entire life, it's all been about getting things done. And that's the most important thing you can possibly do. There we go. It's catching up with me. Next slide, please. But fortunately, or unfortunately, when you're in a large organization, it's very hard to get stuff done. There's a lot of people, as you'll see on the next slide, whose job is to get things, to say no to things. And what we need to do is find ways of making things happen. And it is getting easier. Now, when I was at the European Space Agency, I had a whole bunch of bureaucrats sitting in a back room, and everything that I wanted to do, they'd say no to. But life is changing. When the transistor was invented, it took the resources of a huge organization like Bell Labs to get behind it. Whereas companies like Apple were founded in a garage. Companies like Facebook were founded in a dorm room. And it's getting so much easier to do things with a small team. Synthetic biology, the interchange of information among scientists all across the world. But I think one of the misconceptions that we get is when we talk about technology, people are often just talking about smartphones and apps and digitizing everything. But technology has got to be a little bit more than that. Now, I think over the last 50 years of microelectronics and digital electronics, we've done a fantastic job of packing all of these functions into something that you can carry around in your pocket. And this is something that was so powerful, it was hardly even imagined by some of the best science fiction writers. So we've done a wonderful job there. But the worry is that if we concentrate technology down this particular path of consumer electronics, it's a great industry, but are we approaching the end of innovation? We just heard that how in the last 100 years, human lifespans have extended, food has got cheaper, and life has been getting better and better. But one of the worries that we do get is that are we stalling it just by focusing too much on iterating and iterating and iterating? So the iPhone and the iPad, great innovations, but where are they going to go? And if you speak to a lot of people in the technology area, everything is just going to be faster and more powerful. And that's a bit like going back to the 1950s, and they imagined the future in the 21st century would be just like the 1950s, but maybe your automobile would have some atomic power to make it fly. We hear the same thing in the telecoms industry, whereas people look at the future of the smartphone using graphene and other materials. What's it going to look like? Well, it's going to look just like what you've got in your pocket, but it's going to be credit card size and smaller. Technology never works like that. It goes sideways. So if we look at where we are with technology, I think what we have is three converging forces. And hopefully, if we get it right, those will allow us to address one major challenge. So let me try to explain. First technology that we've got, and this is something that's all around us at the moment, is data. We're collecting information about all kinds of things, whether that's your supermarket loyalty card or your Twitter account or location services. But the problem we have is making use of that data. As we use materials such as plastic electronics, organic electronics, we start printing things, sensors, devices, computing becomes ever cheaper and more ubiquitous, and we move towards this Internet of Things, and the things could be your digital thermostat, or it could be your heart pacemaker or your blood glucose levels. As we move towards this, what we find is there's a lot of barriers to actually making use of this data. So if I go to my doctors, I've got to sit down and I've got to explain to the physician what my symptoms are, what I've been doing, what's wrong with me. All that data about me is out there. They can tell I've been in Madrid eating steak at Casa Paco and drinking too much red wine, and they can make a pretty good guess at why I'm feeling that particular way. But I've got to sit down and explain all of that, and there's inherent biases in the way that I'm going to tell that story. So that data is out there, and this applies to just about every walk of life. The data's there, but it's not being particularly well used. But what really underpins a lot of this is our control over materials. And if you think about it, just about everything we do is because of our control over materials. Whether it's growing cotton plants, and weaving them into, spinning it into cotton and weaving it into clothes, or whether it's control over semiconductors to make our smartphones and displays work. And materials have really always shaped our culture. So 20, 30,000 years ago, as a species, we started just by finding things that we could pick up in the environment. A rock, a stick, and we'd throw a rock at an animal, kill it, and then we'd cook it over the sticks. Later on, we got a bit more sophisticated, and we realized there were different kinds of rocks, and some contained ores and minerals, and by heating those up and mixing them together, we could come up with iron and bronze and eventually steel. 120 years ago, we suddenly realized that there was this thing, synthetic chemistry, and we started making polymers and nylon and most of the plastics that we have around us at the moment. And now, in the early stage of the 21st century, we're having a similar revolution in our understanding of things like nanotechnology, synthetic biology, and materials. And where I think that's taking us is it's taking us right down to the atomic level. Materials like these allotropes of carbon and graphene, which is one of the hottest materials on the planet and may or may not change just about everything we can do. And what we have here is we have individual carbon atoms arranged in these rings in a single layer. And we can create these materials and we can control them and start using them for processing information or making very strong structures. But putting all of that together, what you think about is all we're doing is we're doing just what nature has been doing for a long time. So here's one of my favorite little pests. It's something called a spotted asparagus beetle. And I always like looking at pests in nature because if something's a nuisance, it usually means that it's pretty good at what it does and can make sure it's got enough food to survive and elbow competitors out of the way. Now, if you look at a structure like this, you've got color that comes from structure, not from pigments. You've got something that's rigid. You've got something that's waterproof and breathable. It's self-powered. And all of this is built from the bottom up. And if we were trying to build something like this, a spotted asparagus beetle or a cockroach, we just hardly have the technology to be able to do it. And if we did, we'd have to use 30 or 40 different kinds of polymers and a whole bunch of microelectronics to get it to work and stick a huge great battery on its back. So nature can teach us a lot of things about how we can design materials. And we are gradually unraveling this. We've unraveled the human genome, or at least we know a lot of the code that makes up. We're still not sure what some of those bits of code will actually do, but at least we know what the bits are. Now, the amazing thing about the human genome, for example, is it's an incredibly efficient way of storing information. So if I take a copy of Microsoft Office and run it on a computer, that comes out to, it takes up something like about 1.3 gigabytes of space on a hard disk. And that doesn't contain the instructions to make anything, unlike the human genome. That just gives you a template. If you look at the human genome, plug that into a cell, and it can create you, me, and just about everything else in the room. It contains information about bacteria and the whole of our evolutionary history. Now, probably the most fascinating thing about that is if I took those base pairs, CGAT, coded that up into binary, it would take up probably about 700 or 800 megabytes, and that's the blueprint for an entire human being, compared with over a gigabyte just for Microsoft Office. So you can see how effective nature is at storing information. And if we look at the total computing power in the world, and this probably brings home better than any other illustration of how far we have to go. There was a paper a few years ago that calculated that the total computing power in the world, that's all the smartphones, all the desktop PCs, all the supercomputers at the Pentagon and the NSA, were about the equivalent to one human brain. So nature, I think, will tell us a lot. And these convergence of materials, of life sciences, and nature is probably going to be the most powerful thing we do in the 21st century. But what are we doing it for, is the question. So we do have a lot of major challenges, and at the same time, we're just creating smaller, better, faster stuff and putting all of this intellectual energy into doing that. Now, we know that there are a number of major challenges. And if you talk to anybody, politicians or people on the street, everybody knows that there are issues such as population. And there's resources, whether those resources are rare earth minerals or whether it's energy or drinking water, we're facing all kinds of problems. And the thing that got me started thinking about how to solve this was when there was the oil rig disaster in the Gulf of Mexico a few years ago, and we thought, just a minute, it's just oil. We've been playing with oil for 100 years. We understand the chemistry of oil extremely well. Why is this still washing up on beaches? So we started looking around, and I called up a bunch of petrochemical engineers, and I said, well, surely we should be able to do something about this, maybe through biology, maybe through materials, clump it together to get it to float or sink, or use naturally occurring bacteria that munch on crude oil anyway when there's an oil spill. Can we do that? And I said, yeah, we could do that. I said, how much would it cost? Well, I don't know, a few $100 million over 5 to 10 years. So the question then was, well, why aren't we doing anything about it? Whether this is fresh water that's going to lead to wars and refugees, can we do something about it? And we started looking at this with the World Economic Forum, and what we realized is that, yes, we can do something about it, but we need this period of sustained and responsible innovation to create what we call an insurance policy for the planet. We know that these risks are inevitable, so if we know that it's going to happen, why do we wait until it does happen and then we go in and clean up the mess, which will cost us hundreds of times more? Can we do that? Well, history shows that yes, we can do it. Human ingenuity has always been able to solve problems, whether it's transportation or tools, creating materials, pumping water, moving things around, solving problems of disease and infection through penicillin, understanding and controlling things through computing. And, now, this is where we hit a problem, and probably the most depressing phrase I ever hear when I'm dealing with governments and politicians is, well, in my opinion. I say, look, we're not interested in your opinion. I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist, and I'm interested in the facts, and that is all that matters. And one of the biggest problems that we do face when we're talking about trying to use technology for good is this misguided opinion from ill-informed commentators and politicians who know very little about the science other than it might be dangerous if it goes wrong, and that would reflect badly on me. So I think what we need, and this is a bit of a call to arms, we need more action and less talk. The biggest problem that we have is talking. I've sat in NGO committees where we've been talking about ways to create clean water for people, and we said, let's go out and do it. Let's go out and do it. Let's start the research. Let's go out and do some field trials. And the answer's been, well, we don't have a budget for that, but we can fly everybody to another meeting in Sri Lanka next month. It's a complete waste of time. But there's no shortage of technology. We really don't have to worry about the technology that's out there. It's all there. But we have to look beyond apps. We can't save the world. We can't make a world a better place just by writing apps for smartphones. We've got the tools, I think. They exist in a lot of the universities around the world. And if we're going to make a big difference, we're there. We've got the tools. And let's just make sure we use them wisely and responsibly. Thank you very much.